influencers, inspirational leaders out there. This is Lenka and Alexander Kanan from Earn More Work Less, bringing you another hot episode of the Influential Executives podcast. Today, we speak about how to pick the people you want to surround yourself with. We know that your peer groups, people you meet, have a huge influence on you and help you to become the person you truly want to be. And today we have an expert who says he is not really an expert, he is a lifelong student.
Leon Bottary is how I pronounce it correctly, I believe.
Bottary.
He tells us everything about the power of peers, and I wish I knew this stuff 10 years ago when I was just beginning my career, because there's so much power in learning from each other, in understanding who to surround you with, how to interact with the people around you, so that you and everybody else learns and gets ahead faster. Ultimately, that is what we're looking to achieve. This episode is brought to you by Earn More, Work Less. We work on the art of getting better, more results with less effort, and continuous learning is an important part of the process. Enjoy this interview right now with Leon Bottary. Leo, welcome to the Influential Executive Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Look forward to our conversation today.
So are we. And you know, we were talking about you over lunchtime, and we were talking about how brilliant the topic is that you decided to specialize in. It is something so specific yet so broad, so huge, that I'm very excited about all the value we can take out for our audience.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's been a interesting journey for sure in terms of, if you asked me 10 years ago if this is what I'd be doing right now, I don't think I ever would have come up with that. So it's fun, and it's been very rewarding for sure. So I've loved it very much.
So when did you discover that peers influence is the topic that you want to dedicate your time to?
So it's kind of happened in stages, okay? So I went back to graduate school pretty late. It was between basically the years of 2006 to 2008. And so during that time, when I went back to graduate school, it wasn't the environment that I was used to, where I would go to school and the teacher lectures and you just take notes and everyone goes back and you do your tests. And, the idea of collaborative learning would have been cheating basically back then, right? I mean, it was this mentality that we were kind of all on our own doing this. But in graduate school, when I started working with other students, and what the professors understood was that there was a great deal of intellectual capital in this room. There were people in there who were pretty experienced executives, mid to senior level people oftentimes. And it wasn't just about learning from the professor and learning from the material. It was about what we could gain from one another. And so actually, fast forward, today I've actually been teaching now for 11 years. First for Seton Hall University. I do some work for Northeastern University in Boston, but I spend largely my time teaching for Rutgers right now. And so as a professor there, as an adjunct, basically, I feel like if I do my job well, I create an environment where the students learn most from one another, maybe next from the material. And then if I can offer a little something in there, great. But I think the value they get from one another is very, very powerful. And I noticed it there, not only just in terms of what you can learn, but how students can really help one another be successful. So, oftentimes back in the old days when they were trying to tell you that this program is really, really tough, look to your left, look to your right, only one of you is going to make it, this kind of, nonsense that they would get people, excited about. And today the mentality is much more about, tell you what, you are all here in this room for a reason. You are all going to be successful. We're going to make sure you're successful. You're going to help one another be successful. And it's about believing in one another's ability to again, to just do well. And no matter what life throws at you, we're going to help each other through that. And it's a very different mindset. So having gone through that, first as a student in graduate school, later, as an instructor, I also worked for a company for a while called Vistage. Today it's Vistage Worldwide. Vistage basically assembles and facilitates peer groups for CEOs, key executives, and small business owners, for example, here in the US and about 20 countries around the world. And what I saw was these CEOs working together in much the same way we did as students, and how we benefited from one another, and how when you have the CEO, for example, sitting in a room with other CEOs who know exactly what it's like to be in that chair and have to make a decision for an entire organization, the value of people who share that common challenge of working together to help one another be better leaders and to help their organizations be more successful is very, very powerful. And so what had happened was, during my time at Vistage, I did mostly corporate communications. I led a brand refresh of the company back in 2012. But one of the things that it just struck me was that these groups are so powerful and so effective, and yet too few people use them. And I'm wondering, why is that? We've got to do a better job of creating language and narrative around being able to do this. So that's where I worked with the then CEO, Leon Shapiro, to write The Power of Peers, where we talked about the difference between peer influence that we know we grow up with, our parents cared about who we hung around with as kids and all that, to something we call peer advantage, which is basically what can happen when you are more selective, strategic, and structured about who you surround yourself with, and what the difference that can make for you and for others. So getting that book out, and from there creating workshops and continuing to write and speak and all, led to and have a podcast also, by the way, to write a book called What Anyone Can Do. And What Anyone Can Do is actually based off of a line, because I couldn't figure out what the title of this book should be. And I was like, and whenever I had an issue doing that, when I was writing an article for a blog post or a magazine or something, I would always go dive into the content and figure out if I could extract one little idea that I could build around. So there was a book I actually read in 1976 that was written by a guy named Joe Henderson. He was a former editor of Runner's World, and it was a book about running, basically. And what he said was, if you look at really successful runners, or people that are successful at anything for that matter, in most cases, it's not because they're capable of superhuman feats. They can't leap tall buildings in a single bound. They're pretty much just like, you and me. Basically what these people do, or they do the things that anyone can do, but most of us never will. And I thought, well, what an interesting idea. So the way I thought about it was, I think anyone has the ability to surround themselves with really good people who can encourage them, who can give them advice, who can really lift them up, not drag them down. And when you do that, you will do those little things that anyone can do far more often. And I think thus increasing your chances of really being successful. So I would say the arc of this whole journey in many respects began in academics, continued with formal CEO peer groups, and then has moved now, I think, to a place where I still focus a lot on the formal peer group experience. But at the same time now, it's not just about our peers, it's about the whole circle of people who surround us. And it's not just in a formal setting, it's how we can do a better job of it each and every day in our lives to enlist and engage the support of others, and not feel like we have to try to survive in this world all by ourselves, So anyway, probably a long-winded answer, but at least it gives you kind of a complete feel for kind of where this has come from and how much I enjoy it.
I love it. And I'm just curious, how does that work at universities, or how does it work in school in general, where we normally get a paper, we get the questions, and now, figure it out on your own. Your approach is completely different. So how should I picture it working that in school?
So if you're as a student in school, rather than walking into a classroom, listening to a professor lecture at you, reading books, and then writing a paper or taking a test, you would likely be, and this isn't in every case, but you would do a lot of group work. So now you would be part of a study group, for example, that may include 4, 5, 6 people. And you would, the professor might lecture, but then you would also share stories with one another about your own experiences with this. Part of what you really want to do is not just learn something for the test so you can forget it 2 weeks later. It's how do you engage one another in a way so that it embeds that learning. It makes it part of and makes it sticky, right? I mean, and also really, I think in these settings too, think about it this way. If you were in a book club, right? If anyone's ever who've been a book club, right? So what do? You read the book, you sit around with a half a dozen other people who read the same book, you talk about it. People will notice different things that you didn't notice. There's all kinds of things. So that at the end of like 2 hours, you'll leave with a much richer, greater understanding of that book than you ever could have gleaned on your own. And as a result, it just really becomes a part of you in a way that, again, I think is just stickier than it would be if you read the book on your own and then moved on to the next thing. So I think when it comes to that classroom experience, or even in the online experience, when you can learn and share with one another and actually give one another the courage to apply that learning, which can often happen either in group projects or maybe even in ways outside the classroom experience entirely, it's a much richer educational model. And, it's interesting, on my podcast, I had Linda Darling-Hammond, who's one of the top education experts in the world. And she basically says, too, that when you have teachers at any level, whether it's secondary education or professors, the more that they work together and really understand and participate and engage in collaborating, the more they are able to create those same collaborative environments and those richer learning environments for students. So if you bring that to the business world, the more that CEOs and business leaders work with one another, the easier it is for them to create those same type of rich environments in their own companies.
This is really some like new era that we're entering with the world. I'm not sure if you're familiar with spiral dynamics.
Mm-mm.
So the idea of spiral dynamics highlights how different people in different societies act from a different level of consciousness. And there's a shift from, I think it's the orange arena to the green arena, where you shift from a more individualistic approach to a collective approach, where you leverage the power of working together towards a shared cause rather than everybody being off for yourself.
Well, and I think that in large part, there's been some, you've seen the evolution of that in the last 20 some odd years or so. The Edelman does a trust barometer that they usually, in fact, I think they've been lately releasing the results at Davos, every year. And the trust barometer basically is a study of public trust in institutions. So it looks at government, business, NGOs, and the media. And so when you look at trust declining in many respects, is particularly in government and media, when people don't trust the system, they tend to look to one another for how they're going to get through, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think what you've seen in when you go back and look at, like, I want to say it was like 2003 when one of the prevailing headlines of the study of that year was that people weren't just trusting what companies were telling them for advertised messages, right? They needed to see like a Consumer Reports or a New York Times article or something that would corroborate that, hey, if this product is really, really so great, are other people saying it's great too? in terms of institutions, if you will. But by 2005, we didn't want to just hear what Consumer Reports in the New York Times had to say. We wanted to go online and find out from like Amazon reviews, like, hey, did you read that book? Tell me about it. Have you driven that car? Have you sent your kid to college? You know, we want to talk with people like us. We don't know these people from Adam, but we would accept the prevailing sentiment from people like us as a very powerful data point that would help us in making decisions. So I think as that has evolved over time, and it's why in 2006, you know, I do a workshop where I ask people all the time, all right, in 2006, do you know who Times Person of the Year was? And people are confused and they're thinking about what individual is that? I should remember. And of course, it wasn't any individual at all. It was you, it was me, it was all of us. It was literally Time Magazine named you as Times Person of the Year because they recognized the incredible credibility you had as a spokesperson, and now you had the digital tools to share your thoughts and ideas with the world. And as a result, you were going to change the world. So it really just, so now as we see, now of course we fast forward, here we are in 2019, and we see the incredible influence that we have upon one another. Some of it good, some of it, you know, maybe not so good, but it is what it is, and everyone's reach is really rather extensive, and we do look to one another for a lot, you know, in this world now.
Leo, I'm very curious to hear your observation. If you would look at all people in the business world, what is your impression that most people, they really know what they're doing, or most people don't really know what they're doing and learn to put up the act of as if they know what they're doing?
So you're asking me if most people operate in the fake it until you make it type of
I mean, I'm young, right? So millennial, yes, the M word is here again. I'm now 34 years old. And ever since I really started my career, I've been moving from, I could say disappointment to disappointment. And every time I was there, open mind, ready to learn, being humble, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And the more I started to pay attention to the choices that people around me made and people above me and leadership and other companies, the more I started to see that very few people seem to really grasp the bigger picture and really make choices that are delivering optimal results. So
I think that's a really good point. So there are a couple of things embedded there, I think. You know, one is that I think we're always learning all the time. And, you know, and I think and the better people are at what they do, the more they realize that they're constantly learning. No matter, you know, I don't love it, for example, when people call themselves an expert in anything, right? I mean, to me, there's a level of absurdity about that. It's like, because, so if someone knows more than you about that, does that make them more of an expert? I mean, it's just stupid, you know? So, I mean, I think the idea that we are all students of what we do, we are enthusiasts, we are strategists, we are thought leaders, we are whatever you want to call it, anything but an expert. And I do think that today I think it is far more comfortable it has become far more acceptable for people to admit that they're wrong, to admit that they're still learning, to admit mistakes, and that we find actually really strength in that humility, as opposed to having it be someone who always is, you know, feels like they always have to be right 100% of the time. So I do think that's a good move. I like the fact that for a lot of who I think are really good leaders, they're very authentic. They are, but what makes them great is that they're true to their values and they're true to their priorities. So when you talk about things like seeing the larger picture or whatever that may look like for you, I think when you've got leaders who are really grounded in really solid values that I think speak to the health of an organization, the health of the people who work there, and you know, and to being ethical, you know, in a way that is what I think it takes to sustain a long-term successful organization. I do think that there are actually moves in that direction that I think are quite positive.
Yeah, I see the trend as well.
I really like that you said we continuously learn, and that's something that we discovered as well. And what I appreciate in leaders, I'm always thinking what defines a leader. And I've spotted a pattern a little bit related to what Alex was mentioning. And for me, it's in a certain degree, humility, vulnerability, that they are as well willing to learn from you, even though you are their student. So you attend a workshop, and the person, the teacher, the professor is just interested in you and is willing to learn from you, from your experience. It's something that is for me so important, and that's where I feel comfortable, and I'm way much more open towards learning from these kind of leaders. Now I'm thinking, when do peer groups start playing a role when it comes to influence? Is it at a certain age that we say we start learning from our peers more than from our parents, for example?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, we know that our parents care about who our friends are, because they understand that no matter how strong the bond is with mom and dad, those friends are going to be having a big influence on you. But, there's a story that I tell oftentimes in the workshops that I think you'd be kind of interested in. So just to show you how quickly and how early this starts. So my daughter Taylor, who's 28 years old today, but when she was 4.5, I remember picking her up from childcare. It was on Halloween night. And so I walk in and I say, all right, is Taylor ready to go home? And the woman says, the director would like to have a word with you. And I'm like, oh, great. Because like they're ready. They just want the kids out of there. There's something happened, and usually something not good. So sure enough, though, the director came out and said, hey, actually, I've got to tell you what took place today at our little Halloween party. So it was 3:00, and they have all these treats and crafts and music for the kids and everything else. And they thought it would be a pretty cool idea to hire this woman to dress up as a witch and kind of entertain the little ones. So sure enough, the witch walks through the door, and one of the kids is like, "Wah!" Like they're scared to death, right? So the second kid, the third kid, now all of a sudden is bedlam in here, and the kids are crying and running around the place. It was unbelievable. So sure enough, Taylor apparently is watching this at all of 4.5, runs up to the front of the room. She makes herself real big, and she says, it's okay. She's not real. There's no need to be afraid. And the kids are looking at Taylor, and they're looking at one another, and they go, huh, all right, I guess. And eventually everyone got back to the table. The party continued. The witch stayed. Everything was all great, right? So I'll often ask the folks when I'll talk of a workshop, I said, what caused all the commotion? What caused all the craziness? And some people will say, well, it was fear. It was the witch and all that. It was the first kid who responded to that witch, who sent a signal to everyone else that something's not cool here and we need to be worried about it. and it set off that chain reaction because kids were looking to one another for those signals.
Yeah.
By the same token, although clearly the teachers would have restored order eventually there, it happened a lot faster, I would suggest, because one of their own said, we're good here. There's nothing to be afraid of. And it helped everyone else kind of get that. So when you think about that at preschool age, where people are just really starting to be able to really communicate and look to one another, it starts really, really early. Mm-hmm. And it continues as adults, and it continues, in ways that we're not always even aware of, as adults, in terms of how we're influenced by the people around us. Some of it is very overt, and some of it is very subconscious. And but yeah, it starts early.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what can you do as a parent? You've been through it, and we plan on having children, hopefully soon. So I'm thinking, what can we then do as parents? I often hear you don't have really big influence on who does your daughter date or which kind of group does your son hang out with. How can you influence your children to choose the right peer group?
A couple things. One of them is just, when I talked about leaders having really good values and those being the best leaders, they are also, when a kid, I think, feels comfortable and safe and solid and has good values taught to them at home, and they become rooted in how they see the world, that's helpful. They know the difference between kids who they believe are going to be a good influence on them and kids who are leading them astray, somewhere. And I think for parents, just to stay close to that, to be the kind of home where kids are comfortable inviting their friends over so that you get to know who they are and all. And I think that becomes, a big factor in it, that, home is that place where they can, bring people over and where you can, at the same time really get to learn who those kids are and get to know their parents and get to know just what that whole thing looks like. And, it's obviously really important that, kids are going to have different kinds of friends, and that's great, and a lot of influences there. But I think obviously if there was a relationship that you felt was really toxic and really, problematic, then, you'd have to figure out how you might, approach that to make sure that relationship isn't something that is influential in a way that's detrimental to your own son or daughter.
There's one thing in this matter that doesn't get much attention, and that is the cause and effect relationship. So typically people would say, hey, these are good friends or these are not good friends, toxic, not toxic. But if you really think about how friendships take place, is somebody's circle of friends is more than anything a reflection of who you are yourself. So if you have a toxic friend, then what is it in that friend that mirrors your own child in this example?
Yeah.
They don't come up out of the blue, and nobody hangs out with somebody you don't want to hang out with. So
I think sometimes people don't know those relationships are toxic early on. They have to figure it out. So if someone gets intrigued by someone who happens to be like a real risk taker, because it's not necessarily who they are, but it's like really cool to know someone who does that, or then, you can see how that relationship gets started, but you can also see why they may not last forever. Right. I mean, so I think that, and this is how we learn, we grow up and, we're going to have different relationships with different kinds of people. And we have, call them practice, call them whatever. I mean, but they are, I think, help us hone our ability to determine who are the people we should be surrounding ourselves with and who are the people that may not be the kinds of positive influences in our life. And so we go through that. It's no different than relationships. I'm pretty sure you both dated people probably before you met one another. And from those relationships, you learn what it takes when it comes to finding a true partner, right? Because, you kind of get what you don't want and you kind of, and you get clarity about what you care about, what's important, what are your priorities, and what that looks like, right? So here you are, and not great.
Here we are.
Yeah. I keep thinking about that notion that you are the average of the 5 people you spend most time with. That's like this common wisdom. Has there any research been done around the truth in that statement?
It's a good question. I know that it's been a while since I looked at that particular, Jim Rome's quote and the questions around that. I'm not going to say off the top of my head that I have any memory of any specific data that I could reveal around that. I do think that most people regard it as pretty much common sense, and also regard it as kind of common fact when you look at the type of people we typically surround ourselves with. I think the unfortunate part about it is that can also mean that we tend to surround ourselves with people like us probably a little too often, and that we don't really try to extend our reach in terms of having a broader diversity of people around us. And I mean that from a standpoint of diversity cut in every way. It could be age, it could be culture, it could be education levels, it could be any number of things that just tend to not have us hanging around with people who just agree with us with everything all the time, and it becomes a big echo chamber in terms of who our friends are. But to be willing to do that, one of the things that I talk about in the book that I always felt kind of renders us not always as skilled as we could be at having difficult conversations is, most people, parents, or at least, in the US, it certainly was common that your parent would tell you, don't have conversations with people about politics and religion because it's just going to go badly, and it's, all this other stuff. But because of that, so people tend to avoid those conversations. They don't talk about politics because they think it leads to a fight. They don't talk about religion because they don't want to feel like they don't want to insult anyone, or they don't want to, but because we approach it from the perspective of this is going to be a fight or going to be a debate, as opposed to this is an opportunity to learn. Like, why does someone have the political views they have? It came from somewhere. I would love to learn about that. Why does someone, what role does faith play in someone's life? And where did that come from? And I'd like to learn about how that makes you, a better person, or whatever that is, right? But if these were opportunities to learn and be open, and not to have these things become hardcore beliefs that we have that at the expense of any other right answer, becomes kind of silly. But we are kind of, I think, not always prepped, to do that. And I think as adults, that doesn't help us learn very much. And then it also puts us in a position where we tend to surround ourselves with people just like us, probably a little more than we should.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense. I'm making so many clicks listening to you. And we all say, like, yes, we do want to learn. Then what we don't realize is that we do not want to face our own fears, namely fear of judgment. Because if you put yourself out of your comfort zone, out of the comfort zone of the people that who always agree on what you say, then you have to challenge that fear of judgments, of asking questions, because then you might be vulnerable. You might say, hey, I don't know. Because so often I remember listening to people and like, do you know this book? Yeah, I know. And no idea. I've never heard of that. I forgot about it. But you don't want to look stupid. You don't want to be judged. And thereby you don't learn. Because imagine that I say, hey, no idea. I've never read that book. Then you will get new insights, new information. And the chance that the person will think that she is stupid, there is a chance, but it has nothing to do with you. So there is so much more into that than just saying, I want to learn and I surround myself with people. But indeed, like, why don't you surround yourself with all kinds of people, different people? Now, the question is, how do I then choose the right people to surround myself with?
That's a great question. Part of it has to do with knowing yourself. So one of the things is I talked about in the book, for example, and so let's confine it for a moment to, let's say I want to learn a language, or I want to run a marathon or whatever, right? So when I think about, all right, so who are the kind of people I'd want to surround myself with if I wanted to learn a language? Well, probably other people who have done that, or people who are who speak the language that I want to learn, or people who, even if they can't be helpful in that regard, people who just in general will be encouraging and ask me, hey, how am I doing with that goal that I said that I wanted for myself, not something that someone's telling me to do. Same thing with, marathon training. It's like to be able to have other people I can run with, who can encourage me, who can, ask me, hey, how did that run go yesterday that I know was part of your training schedule? Or how can I give you tips to help you be successful in this race that you want to have? And I think when we know ourselves and what we want, and we can think about the people that we want to enlist and engage who can be helpful with that, with the understanding, by the way, that we want to be helpful to those people as well. They have goals, they have their lives, they have other things they want to do. And I think to the extent that, we see that not only as reciprocal, and to the people who work with us. But also, when I think about the podcast guests that I had, all of whom were incredibly successful in their own right, all of whom surrounded themselves with really great people. The idea, when I said to them, hey, did you get where you are like totally by yourself? And they would laugh at that idea. Of course they didn't. And nor were they always able to reciprocate to people who gave them so much. But what they are able to do is pay it forward to others, so that now they're in a position of being successful. They're to a person, they were all willing to help anyone who wanted some guidance in their particular field and whatever that looks like. And so I would suggest too, that if you're looking at wanting to surround yourself with the right people and you're at all bashful about asking people who have already done what you're looking to do, don't be, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to be more than willing to, if you're serious about what you want to do, they are more than happy to share with you some of what they've learned along the way to help you get where you need to be.
Everybody wants to be a Yoda.
Sure. And it's funny you say that, because people love to talk about what they know really well. They really do. You talk about, you're actually putting them in the wheelhouse of their comfort zone, right? Like you're talking about, right? So there's nothing threatening to them at all. In fact, they get to pontificate about whatever it is, but it's to your benefit. So yes, they would love to be Yoda, and they love to, ask the reverse question and the whole thing. Yeah.
I'm always looking at concrete applications. So now let's see. Yeah, we have already been very concrete. Now I'm zooming in on this office environment. And, let's go back in time, like about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was leading a department with a couple of teams. I was their team leader. And my world inside that office was really just that department, my manager and my manager's manager, a few peers that I saw every now and then on like the cross department meetings. And of course, Lenka, she worked in another department. So, we were in contact as well.
There you go.
From a career growth perspective and learning perspective, what are the types of more diverse type of people that I could think of connecting with? For example, agree a weekly lunch or a monthly lunch or whatever. Which direction could I think to define who those people are for me?
Well, again, I think it really has to do with understanding yourself and where you want to go. Laura Goodrich actually has this great video, and it was funny. She talks about the fact that she did this in reverse. Most people write the book and then there's the movie. In her case, it was the video, the movie, and then she wrote the book afterwards. But it was called Seeing Red Cars. And what she basically says was that when you go and see a red car and you notice that red car and you find that really kind of cool, now you're going to start noticing red cars everywhere, because your brain is just kind of, tuned into that. Well, she was talking about that because she said, when you ask people, most people, when you say, hey, what do you want? Like, what do you want in life or whatever? Many times people answer the question this way. They say, well, what I don't want is blah, blah, blah. And they talk about all these things, right? But they don't want to say, I want to do this or I want to do that. So once we know and have the courage even to say it out loud, that I want to do this, then I think we start seeking out the people who can help us make that possible in whatever way, shape, or form. It could be a colleague that models behavior that you admire. It could be someone who is in another position in the organization who knows the company really well and kind of knows how things work. Any number of things there that I think can be helpful in terms of just getting around the kind of individuals that there's a great cartoon that I use every once in a while, and it's two little kids. You talk about how young this all starts, and it's two little kids, and it's a cartoon, and they're sitting and playing, and the caption underneath is one kid saying to the other, so what do you want to be when you give up? and not when you grow up, when you give up. And, so this idea that, I'm thinking, well, that's not the kid that I want to be hanging around with, right? At any age, right? as whether I'm 4 years old or 40 years old, that's, so I think surrounding ourselves, first of all, with people who are positive forces, for us, who believe in possibilities, who believe in us in a way that helps us believe in ourselves, I think is extremely powerful. So if, even if the person is not a subject matter expert or can't help you directly in some way, just even having just positive people around you who, again, I think believe in you, I think is no real substitute for that.
What can organizations do to cherish this? Because I can imagine that I join an organization, but I can't really choose the people I will hang out with. Most of the time, when I apply for a job, I don't really see my team members, right? I just see my team leader, maybe team leader's team leader, manager. But I have no idea how I'm going to be 8 hours around.
Right. So this is where you've got to trust in the organization, for example. And of course, as we all know, some organizations are really good at it. Some organizations are really bad at it. But when it comes to the type of people they hire and having a real understanding of who are the people that are successful in this organization and why, versus who are the people we hire who don't make it. And hopefully over time, they get to learn about who those kinds of people are, so that even though you'll have some diversity among employees, as is really necessary, there are some core values and core ways they approach their work and things they do that you should have in common. And I think when I think about oftentimes whether it's great sports teams or great business teams, it's, I think, first and foremost, people who are really committed to being good teammates, that it's not all about them. That they understand that they're going to be better by engaging everyone else, and that the team is capable of far more than any individual is. A place that I worked a number of years ago was called Mullen. Today it's called Mullen Lowe. It's an advertising agency, based in Boston. And it's probably one of the most combative environments you would ever go to, right? But these aren't people fighting against one another. These people come there because they believe they can be around other people who are capable together of creating the best advertising in the world. So the way they challenge one another, and the reason you can get so much confrontation isn't, again, it's not fighting against one another. It's fighting for the best idea. It's fighting for the best work. And they believe that if we challenge one another, we're all really smart, talented, good people who come at this from really different perspectives, that if we really continue and work together like that, because we share this common goal of a team putting together a piece of work that we know as individuals none of us would be capable of doing by ourselves, that is really, really powerful. We used to participate in these sessions where we would come up with campaigns for, it could be brand new, it could be prospects or existing clients, whatever. But we'd put a whole bunch of people in a room for hours on end, and we would come up with a campaign. We'd take it about as far as you can with a big group, and we'd all sit back and go, "That was awesome," And we're all self-congratulatory, type of environment there, and it was really kind of fun. But then we'd wipe that away, and we'd do it a second time, a third, a fourth, sometimes a fifth time. The great thing about that was the more the people dug deep and continued in that process, the better the work became. So that in all of the times I ever participated in that exercise, the first idea that everyone celebrated as being so awesome never made the cut to show the client, not one time. So it's really remarkable. And so I think when you really start thinking about, understanding where I am and my currency with everyone I work with, whether it's my peers or my bosses or whatever that may be, for you, is really about bringing my A game every day, being prepared, being ready. And that, when you have a culture where everyone does that, it is a sight to see. I mean, it really is. And the better the people can be at creating those kinds of cultures that are capable of producing that kind of work, they're going to do some really special things. And people, it's the type of place you want to stay.
It makes so much sense. That's all great, that we are so amazing in saying, oh, this type of environment isn't good and these people are toxic. And it all starts with us, like not knowing who we are, not knowing what we want. And it's exactly spot on. We most of the time we know what we don't want, but when we really ask ourselves, what's the vision, what am I working towards, even in a few months time, most of the time what I get as response is very generic, like, okay, good house, and and this and that, family, but it's not very specific. So very rarely we know really who we are, what our dreams, what do we want to make our reality. And the same goes for organizations. As long as the organization doesn't know, or the people, directors do not know what's the core of it, who do they want to become, who they are, then it's hard to have those people inside of those organizations that would actually really be enthusiastic and great in working together.
You mentioned the word toxic. It speaks to one of my favorite stories. Was there's a woman, her name is Paula Schifino. She runs an agency called Schifino Lee in Tampa, Florida. She told me a story one time about her daughter. And her daughter was on a soccer team. And apparently the soccer coach had done something that she didn't like. And then she was getting all the players kind of worked up about this move that the coach made, and getting them, kind of all negative about it. And the mom caught wind of it. She calls the daughter over and said, "You need to be a leader on this team, not a ringleader." And I thought, what a brilliant way to describe the difference between, right, someone who's a ringleader, someone who's just playing that toxic role, who, is trying to get everyone all negative and whipped up into something that was anti, what the coach may have wanted, versus someone who can be a leader on that team and try to either, work with what the coach is trying to do and gain a better understanding of it and communicate that to others, or at least be able to speak truth to power in a direct way, not through everyone else and getting the team all whipped up on. I mean, think about the number of employees out there who can just be toxic, who are gossiping about this, that, or the other. And the thing about that is those people do exist, but what allows them to exist is our willing to listen to it, our willingness to engage in any way in that conversation, as opposed to saying, you know what, you don't need to be doing that. And all of a sudden that shuts that down, right? So now, if no one has an audience for that type of stuff, then that's how you help change behavior like that. Or if that's just who that person is, then they need to be somewhere. They need to be working for your competitor. They don't need to be working for you anymore.
Indeed. Write a good recommendation letter. Well, the thing with positivity and negativity is that it only dawned on me a couple of years ago that a good leader, by definition, has to be positive-minded all the time. Because being negative only means what you don't want. And moving away from what you don't want doesn't necessarily bring you in a good place.
No.
Even more like you're steerless. You end up somewhere by coincidence, and chances are there's only a few ways to get it right and infinite ways to get it wrong. So you need to be positive. You need to be aimed at what you do want, because only then you have a shot of actually getting there.
So think about it this way. A good friend of mine, his name is Robert Thompson, wrote a book called The Offsite. And in it, there's a character in the book. It's like a business fable type of a book. And in it is the character who's basically the metaphor for leadership and being a good leader. And he's basically the groundskeeper. So it's not the concierge, it's not the manager of the hotel, it's the one who takes care of all of the plants and, flowers and everything around. And of course, the reason he becomes such this great metaphor for a good leader is that, so what does the groundskeeper do? He makes sure that the plants get enough water, that they're fed, that they're getting enough sunlight, or maybe they're getting too much sunlight. They need to be moved to a shaded area. Whatever that looks like, he creates the environment for the flowers and the plants to thrive. he doesn't scream at the plants to tell them to grow more quickly, right? He's not, he's not punishing, the shrubbery, okay? And that isn't how you make things grow. That isn't how you make things work. And so to your point, I think that the negative leader who thinks they can scream their way to prosperity is not a very good either short or long-term solution for that matter. So
you cannot make grass grow faster by pulling it.
There you go. Exactly.
It's an old Japanese saying I read recently. It stuck with me.
I like it.
Leo, do you like to play a small game with us?
Sure.
We recently introduced the rapid fire question round to our interviews, so that we pass by this conscious mind and we play a word association game. The first thing that comes up in your mind, you get to answer by one word alone, or maybe a term. And we shoot around about 10 words and short questions. Are you ready for that?
Sure. Ready.
You can go.
Leader.
Servant.
Thinking.
Doing.
Money.
Influence.
Vacation.
Relaxation.
Happiness.
Family.
Story.
Story. Lead. Story first.
Sorry, what was that?
It made me, when I heard story, I think about a phrase from Heather Pemberton Levy, who talks about story first. So the idea of tell a story.
Mm.
So first kind of hit me, I guess.
Cool. Success.
Complete, I guess. And I guess the reason I say that was because I don't think success is money, happiness, power, all those kinds of things. I just think it's so much. I think there's something holistic about it. So
Yeah.
I couldn't come up with the right word. So
Life.
Precious.
The purpose of life.
Others.
What is currently the number one thing on your bucket list?
Number one thing on my bucket list. Probably. Oh, it's a great question. I just want to see more of the world. I've traveled quite a bit, but I was trying to name a specific place, but I don't think there is a specific place. I just think there's a lot in this world that I want to continue to see and explore. And so my bucket list is to go do that.
Travel.
So when you like exploring, then I'm very excited to hear your answer to this question. What is the weirdest animal that you have ever sat on?
The weirdest animal I've ever sat on.
How did you come with that?
That is awesome. What a great question. That is really interesting. Huh.
I wonder what would be my answer.
So it would obviously be something I probably sat on by mistake. So yeah, no. I'm sure I sat on the ground camping or something like that on a snake or a rodent or something like that scurried away,
Ladybug.
But yeah, who knows?
And yours?
Yeah, I'm just wondering. I was so surprised by that question. It would be probably an ant.
There you go.
Like I would sit on it coincidentally and sit on it consciously, and I don't really know.
It's funny.
No, so an animal that I actually sat on purpose one time that was certainly different, not necessarily, was I have been on a camel. So I've been on a camel. So there you go.
That's cool. That's cool. I was on a camel once as well. That was pretty nice. I was once on a horse, and that was terrifying.
What was it terrifying?
Yeah. It's like you can be thrown off any single moment, and there was no sense of control.
It's a big, powerful animal. Exactly.
Yeah. And it was so high.
Now, okay, my very last question is, what is your favorite game to play?
Golf.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's on my bucket list, to be honest. I've never played a golf, and I would love to experience it because it's technical and you are outdoors, and I always see everything is green and blue sky,
beautiful.
Nice weather. Well, probably we will have to go somewhere else down to the Netherlands, but
there's great golf clothing that I'm sure you would love, all kinds of good golf gear, and then of course the settings, the courses are magnificent. You go to places all over the world that are just beautiful to see, and so it's a great game, and most people are bad at it, so you got no worries about, like, if you're not hitting the ball great. This is not the PGA Tour out there, believe me, when you're out watching normal people try to play this sport. So it's just a lot of fun, and the more you can just have fun with it, not have expectations for that you're going to make it a career, the more that you'll enjoy it. So
I'm just going to hang out with cool people who can teach me that. Like now I know the tips and tricks from you on how to surround myself with the right people. So I'm going to find the right golf club, ask the universe for a free entrance, and here I go. I mean,
there you go. You do it.
And you already had some practice driving the golf cart.
Yeah, when I stole it once.
Fair enough.
That was a great story with a couple of entrepreneurs being on a workshop for a full week. And one of the evenings, I just found a golf cart with keys in them. So it was universe trying to communicate to me, like, Lenka, go and drive me. So there was. It was lots of fun.
So were you finally apprehended, or what happened? How did you get it back there, or what happened?
What?
Were you caught stealing the golf cart?
Not at all. I just parked it back, left the keys back inside, and all went fine. Universe really wanted me to do that, and provided me also no security or guards or anyone else who was kind of actually authorized to to drive it.
All Brothers was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Leo, is there one final message that you'd like to pass along to everyone listening right now?
I would, and it's not a message from me. I'm going to read a quote from Sekou Andrews, who opened the quote in the book, and I think it's really, really powerful, and it's something I'd like people to think about. And the reason I'm going to read it is because I just really don't want to mess it up. And Sekou says, there is an incredible power that comes from surrounding yourself with communities in which you feel small among them, and they look at you like a giant. So hopefully your listeners will take that one home and think about that a little bit, because these are the kinds of people that I think can really make a difference in our lives. And I think we can make a difference in theirs as well.
I very much like this quote.
Very powerful.
Leo, when our listeners and viewers say, hey, I really want to know more about what Leo does, where they can find you?
So I'm definitely, very active on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. And it's LeoBottary. And of course, they can go to leobottary.com, as well. Got my website, and we're, in terms of things, my speaking, workshops, blog, will be kind of kicking off our, we took a little bit of a hiatus away from our podcast, and now I'm inspired to, but we are going to kick it off again next week anyway, but this helps me even, feel like, I want to do that even more, and see, I'm hanging around with you guys, and now I'm going to go be excited about making that happen. So that'll be great.
Yes.
I love it.
That's brilliant.
I love it. I love it. And I'm excited to listen to the podcast as well. I'm sure there's going to be lots of value and lots of practical tips as well.
Well, thank you both. And, I look forward to subscribing to your podcast. And you've had some really, you've had some wonderful guests. I know you've had Peter Senge and Marshall Goldsmith and people like that. And, it's kind of be honored to be part of that company, let me just say. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. It was a great honor to have you here. I really enjoyed this interview. I learned a lot. And as we know, this is what life is about, learning. So I want to thank you from every corner of my heart. It was a pleasure to spend this hour with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm so happy that we had Leo on this interview, because now I finally know that first step is to get to know myself better and really knowing what am I up to, what is the next thing that I want to achieve. What is my vision? What are my dreams? And once I know myself better, then it's way easier to define who are the people that I want to surround myself with.
To follow Leo Bottary.
I think we misspelled the name already so many times.
That's just hard to pronounce. As long as we know how to spell it, we can find him online. So that's Leo, LeoBottary.com. That's his personal website. And to follow him on social media, you can find him on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. There's only one Leo Bottary. So we're gonna be able to find him. With Earn More, Work Less, we create these podcasts to bring world-class education to the high potential leaders who are busy, overloaded nowadays. And part of what makes us so effective is that we always look for that one simple strategy, that one thing you can apply that immediately brings you a big, powerful result. Big output with small effort. So here's the one challenge I'm giving you right now. Let's meet with somebody different. You are the average of the people that you spend most time with. So what can you do today? Which colleague from another department, which senior manager, which other executive, which CEO of another business in your industry can you invite for a coffee or for a lunch to leverage the power of peers?
And when you don't know how to do it, just go and buy Leo's book, The Power of Peers, or his another book, What Anyone Can Do. Because that's where you find the strategies, the tips and tricks on how to surround yourself with the right people.
That's all for today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Let's all go out, make it a beautiful day, and have fun.